Welcome to the deep dive.
Hmm.
We are so glad to have you with us today.
Yeah, thank you for joining us. We have a really fascinating topic lined up.
We really do. But I want you to start by doing a quick mental exercise for me. If you were to close your eyes right now,
Right.
just picture World War I. What is the very first image that comes into your mind?
For almost everyone, it's going to be the mud.
Exactly, the mud. You are probably imagining the endless, waterlogged trenches of the Western Front.
Right.
You're picturing the rusted barbed wire, the absolute stalemate, the gray skies, and just the sheer brutal immobility of millions of men grinding against each other for, yards of shattered earth.
It's the dominant cultural memory of the First World War. It's what we're taught in school.
It is. But today, I want you to take that mental picture and completely throw it away. Just wipe the mud from your mind.
Because we are going to a completely different theater of war, one that operated by entirely different rules.
We are heading to the shifting sands, the ancient sun-baked plains, and the thundering cavalry charges of the Middle East. Today, we are taking a deep dive into the Battle of Megiddo.
Fought over just a few incredibly intense days between September 19th and September 25th, 1918.
And it really is a complete paradigm shift from what we traditionally associate with that war. Our mission for this deep dive is to synthesize all the tactical maneuvers, the grand strategies, and the on-the-ground realities of this battle.
Right, and we're pulling from a very comprehensive breakdown. We have sources detailing the prelude, the belligerents, the specific tactics used, and the aftermath of Megiddo.
And to give you a sense of scale right up front, this isn't just another engagement in a long, grinding war. This is the final fatal blow to an entire empire.
Yes. We are talking about the utter destruction of the Ottoman Empire's military presence in the region.
And what we want to extract for you today is the ultimate blueprint of strategic deception and mobile warfare. We're going to explore how a World War I battle, fought on ancient biblical ground, actually laid the very foundations for the blitzkrieg tactics of the modern era.
It's a story of fake armies, literal piles of gold.
Deliberate communication blackouts.
Yes, exactly. And speeds of maneuver that the world had simply never seen before. It really is a masterclass in operational art.
It is. But to understand how this masterpiece was painted, we first have to look at the canvas itself.
The geography here is absolutely vital. You cannot understand the Battle of Megiddo without understanding the ground it was fought on.
Okay, let's unpack this, because the ancient fortress of Megiddo stands on a hill known as Tel Megiddo, right?
Correct. It sits right at the mouth of the Musmas Pass. And geographically, it completely controls the routes to the north and to the interior. It dominates a massive flatland known as the Plain of Armageddon.
Which is also called the Plain of Esdraelon. And just pause on that name for a second, the Plain of Armageddon.
It carries quite a weight, doesn't it?
It really does. General Edmund Allenby, the British commander we are going to be talking a lot about today, he specifically chose the name Battle of Megiddo for its biblical and symbolic resonance.
Even though very limited fighting actually took place right at Tel Megiddo itself.
Exactly. But this is ground that has seen warfare since the dawn of recorded history. I mean, everyone from the ancient Egyptians to Napoleon fought their way across these exact same plains. It's like the ultimate historical chessboard.
It's a geographical choke point. Throughout human history, if you wanted to move an army from Egypt up into Syria or Mesopotamia, you had to go through this area.
And by 1918.
By 1918, this plain linked the Jordan Valley on one side and the Plain of Sharon on the other. It was sitting about 40 miles behind the Ottoman front lines.
So they formed a massive semicircle around the main Ottoman positions.
Right, which were dug into the rugged Judean hills. If you could control that plain, you controlled the movement, the supply, and frankly, the survival of entire armies.
So that is the chessboard. Let's talk about the players. On the Entente, or Allied side, we have the Egyptian Expeditionary Force.
Usually just referred to as the EEF.
The EEF, right. And it's important to understand that they did not have an easy road to get to this point. In the early years of the war, 1915 and 1916, they were purely on the defensive. They had to stop Ottoman attacks on the Suez Canal.
And we really cannot overstate the strategic importance of the Suez Canal to the listener. For the British Empire, the canal was the jugular vein.
Vital artery.
Yes, linking Britain to its vast resources and manpower in India, Australia, and New Zealand. If the Ottomans had managed to capture it or even just block it,
The British global war effort would have been severely, maybe fatally crippled.
Absolutely. So under their original commander, General Archibald Murray, the EEF manages to secure the canal and push the Ottomans back across the Sinai Peninsula.
But then Murray hits a wall.
He does. He gets bogged down and loses the first and second battles of Gaza in 1917. The momentum completely stalls out.
Which is the moment when London decides a change in leadership is absolutely necessary. Enter General Edmund Allenby.
Allenby arrives and brings a completely renewed, aggressive energy to the theater. He reorganizes the force, breaks through the Ottoman lines at the Third Battle of Gaza, and by December 1917, he achieves a massive, symbolic, and strategic victory.
He captures Jerusalem?
He captures Jerusalem, he has the momentum, he has the morale, he is prepping for the knockout blow.
But then, the strategic reality of a global war crashes down on him. Just a few months later, in March 1918, the German army launches a massive spring offensive back in Europe on the Western Front.
The Allied lines in France are buckling under the pressure.
And the shockwaves of that crisis in Europe hit Allenby directly in the Middle East. The War Office in London realizes they are facing a potential collapse in France, so they send an urgent directive to Allenby.
He is ordered to immediately send his best, most experienced troops back to the Western Front to plug the gaps.
So how big of a loss are we talking about here? Because if you are planning a massive offensive, losing your veterans has to be devastating.
It's a catastrophic drain on his resources. Allenby is forced to send approximately 60,000 officers and men out of the Middle East theater entirely.
60,000.
60,000. To break that down, he loses 2 complete infantry divisions, 24 additional infantry battalions, 9 cavalry regiments, and he loses all of his tanks.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because
Yeah.
if we think about this in modern strategic terms, it is a nightmare scenario. Imagine you are a modern theater commander or even a CEO, right?
Sure.
You've spent a year perfectly tuning a massive combined arms offensive. You've secured your foothold. You are ready to launch. And suddenly, top command calls and says, there's a crisis elsewhere. We are taking away your entire air support wing, all of your special operations groups, and your 2 most experienced armored divisions. But we still expect you to win.
It's a monumental setback. Allenby is essentially stripped of his veteran corps right as he needs them most. He is left with a skeletal framework of his original army.
So what does he do?
Well, he has to completely rebuild his force from scratch throughout the spring and summer of 1918. To replace the troops he lost, he brings in 2 British Indian Army cavalry divisions and 2 Indian infantry divisions that had been fighting over in the Mesopotamian campaign.
Oh, wow.
And he also reforms 4 of his remaining infantry divisions on the British Indian Army pattern.
What does that pattern actually look like in practice?
It means that within a single brigade, you would have 3 Indian battalions and 1 British battalion fighting alongside each other.
The diversity of this rebuilt force is staggering to think about. I mean, you look at this and you have British troops, Indian troops from various regions, Australians and New Zealanders.
African forces as well.
Right. You even have a brigade-sized detachment of French troops attached to the 54th Division. Imagine the sheer logistical, communicative, and cultural challenge of getting all these different groups into one unified command structure.
It's an immense hurdle. You are dealing with different languages, different dietary requirements, different equipment standards, and vastly different training backgrounds.
It must have been chaos initially.
You have seasoned British officers trying to integrate with Indian cavalrymen who have just arrived from a completely different desert campaign. It requires an intense, exhausting period of reorganization and retraining throughout the grueling summer heat of 1918.
And Allenby is desperately trying to forge this disparate multinational group into a unified weapon that can strike with precision.
Yes. And while Allenby is trying to piece his army back together, we need to look across the trench lines at his opponent.
The Ottoman forces. They were organized under what was called the Yildirim Army Group. And I love this detail. Yildirim translates to thunderbolt.
It does. They had actually originally been formed to go recapture Baghdad from the British, but the situation in Palestine got so dire they were diverted to face Allenby instead.
And the leadership dynamic within the Yildirim Army Group is highly complex and fraught with internal conflict, isn't it?
Highly fraught. Originally, this army group was commanded by a very prominent German general named Erich von Falkenhayn.
Now, Falkenhayn had a very specific philosophy for how to fight this war in the desert. He wanted to employ what he called a yielding defense. What does that actually mean for the soldiers on the ground?
A yielding defense is essentially a strategy of trading space for time and preservation. Falkenhayn believed that holding static, rigid positions in the vastness of the Middle East was a mistake.
Why?
Because his philosophy was to let the British attack, let them punch themselves out, and extend their supply lines across the harsh terrain, while the Ottoman forces would conduct organized tactical retreats to shorten their own supply lines. He didn't want to hold ground at all costs.
It's like a boxer playing rope-a-dope. You lean back against the ropes, let the opponent exhaust themselves swinging, and you only strike back when they are completely overextended.
That's a great analogy.
But the Ottoman officers absolutely hated Falkenhayn for this, didn't they?
They despised the strategy. From the perspective of the Ottoman commanders, this was their sovereign territory being surrendered. They blamed Falkenhayn directly for the loss of Jerusalem, which was a massive psychological blow.
I can imagine.
The friction between the German high command and the Ottoman officers became so toxic that a change had to be made. Command of the Yildirim Army Group shifts to another German general, Otto Liman von Sanders.
And Liman von Sanders comes in and completely reverses Falkenhayn's philosophy.
Yeah.
He decides he isn't going to retreat another inch. He plants his feet and orders the entire Ottoman army to dig in and hold the line.
Exactly.
It seems incredibly stubborn. I mean, if your supply lines are stretched and you're facing a massive allied force, wouldn't a tactical retreat save your army from being encircled?
What's fascinating here is the underlying reasoning behind Liman von Sanders' decision. It was not a purely military calculation. It was heavily dictated by political and psychological realities.
Tell me more about that.
Liman reasoned that if he ordered his armies to keep retreating through Palestine, it would completely shatter the morale of the Ottoman troops, who were already exhausted and undersupplied.
Morale was already hanging by a thread.
Right. He also knew a long retreat would ruin their draft animals, which were essential for moving artillery and supplies.
But there was an even bigger fear looming in the background, wasn't there? A major geopolitical fear.
Precisely. Liman knew that a visible Ottoman retreat would act like a dinner bell for the Arab Revolt. If the Ottomans looked weak and were falling back, it would encourage the Arab uprising to spread further north into the Ottoman rear areas in Syria.
Ah, I see.
Furthermore, a retreat in Palestine would completely cut off and isolate the Ottoman forces that were stationed much further south in the Hejaz region.
It's a profound modern dilemma that leaders still face today. I mean, do you take a short-term tactical loss, falling back to a position that is cheaper and easier to defend, if it risks a massive long-term PR and political disaster?
That's exactly the choice he was facing.
Liman von Sanders essentially decided that the optics and the political fallout of a retreat were far more dangerous than the military risk of holding a wide, very thin line against a superior force.
And we really need to emphasize just how thin that line was. Liman's defense consisted of 3 armies. You had the 8th Army holding the Mediterranean coast, the 7th Army entrenched in the rugged Judean hills in the center, and the 4th Army guarding the Jordan River and the territory to the east.
Which included the vital city of Amman and the Hejaz Railway. So they are spread across a massive geographic front.
By August 1918, Liman's actual frontline fighting strength was just over 40,000 infantrymen.
Across that whole front.
Across that whole front. Now, they were heavily armed. They had a formidable array of machine guns and artillery. But because they were stretched across such a vast distance, they had virtually no strategic reserve stationed behind the front lines.
They were a hard shell with a hollow center.
Exactly.
Which brings us perfectly to the eastern flank and the absolute logistical headache that the Ottomans were dealing with out there. If Liman von Sanders was terrified of the Arab Revolt spreading, he had incredibly good reason.
He certainly did.
Because operating east of the Jordan River, you have the forces of the Arab Northern Army. They are under the overall leadership of Emir Feisal, and fighting alongside them is a very famous British liaison officer named T. Lawrence.
Who history remembers as Lawrence of Arabia.
Right.
The role of the Arab Revolt in this campaign is a brilliant study in asymmetric, irregular warfare. They were not fighting set-piece trench battles. Their primary obsessive target was the Hejaz Railway.
Why the railway? Why not attack the Ottoman cities directly?
Because the railway was the literal lifeline of the Ottoman Empire in that specific region. It was the only viable way of supplying the Ottoman troops stationed all the way down in Medina.
So cut the line, starve the troops.
Yes. By blockading isolated garrisons like the one at Milan, and by constantly blowing up stretches of the tracks, the Arab forces were forcing the Ottomans to tie down massive numbers of troops.
So instead of fighting Allenby on the front line, thousands of Ottoman soldiers were sitting in the desert, desperately trying to protect metal rails from being dynamited in the middle of the night.
That's the essence of their impact.
But let's pull back the curtain on what a rebellion actually cost to maintain. We have this highly romanticized cinematic image of brave warriors riding dromedary camels across the sweeping dunes, fighting purely for freedom and independence.
And while that ideological drive absolutely existed, a sustained rebellion requires vast amounts of cold, hard resources.
Exactly. The British were financing this uprising, and the numbers are just staggering.
The financial commitment is a crucial piece of the strategic puzzle here. In mid-1916, the British began subsidizing the Arab forces with £30,000 a month.
That's a lot of money back then.
And importantly, this was always paid in solid coin, gold and silver. Paper money was utterly useless in the desert economy.
Wow.
By the time we reached the Megiddo offensive in late 1918, that subsidy had ballooned to an astonishing £220,000 a month.
Just imagine the pure logistical nightmare of that. They are literally shipping hundreds of thousands of pounds in heavy metal coins across a hostile desert landscape every single month just to keep the local forces supplied and motivated.
It's incredible to picture.
And it wasn't just cash, was it?
No, it was a massive material investment. Alongside the gold, the British were supplying armored cars, specialized Indian machine gun detachments, French Algerian mountain artillery batteries, and thousands upon thousands of dromedary camels to keep the forces mobile.
It was an enormous drain on the British treasury to keep this proxy force active in the Ottoman rear.
It really was.
Which brings up a fascinating debate for you as you listen to this. Think about how organizations allocate massive budgets today. If you are funding a massive proxy initiative, you want to know your return on investment. Was £220,000 in gold a month worth it to keep the Ottomans constantly looking over their shoulder?
Well, even within the Allied command structure, there were highly conflicting viewpoints on the actual value of the Arab forces. It is essential to look at both perspectives here to understand the tension of the time.
Sure.
On one side of the argument, you have the view of T.E. Lawrence and his supporters. From their perspective, the Arab regular forces were highly effective. They successfully blockaded the Ottoman garrison at Masan. They managed to blow up an 80-mile stretch of the railway around a station called Mudawara.
80 miles of track destroyed.
According to Lawrence, they effectively paralyzed Ottoman operations in that entire southern sector, undeniably destroying critical infrastructure.
But that is not how everyone saw it. Because you have conventional military officers who are highly skeptical of the whole operation. We have a direct quote from an officer named Rex Hall, who served with the 5th Light Horse Brigade.
What did he say?
He said, and I quote, "I do not for one moment denigrate the good name of Lawrence. But when it came to cooperation with Allenby's forces, the Arabs under Lawrence had, in my experience, nuisance value only."
Nuisance value only. That quote perfectly encapsulates the classic historical friction between highly disciplined, conventional military forces and loosely organized, irregular guerrilla units.
How so?
If you are a conventional cavalry officer like Rex Hall, you are trained to look for reliable, punctual flank support in a tightly scheduled set-piece battle. When you look at an unpredictable tribal force that fights on its own terms and its own schedule, you might perceive them as nothing more than a nuisance.
But Allenby is looking at the board from a much higher elevation.
Exactly. From a grand strategic level, Allenby recognized the sheer mathematical value of the proxy war. He knew that every single Ottoman battalion deployed to guard a railway station in the deep desert was a battalion that was not standing in front of his infantry on the plain of Sharon.
Math doesn't lie.
Whether they were a nuisance or a lethal threat, they were bleeding the Ottomans of manpower and attention.
Keep that proxy war and that Eastern distraction in mind, because it plays directly into Allenby's ultimate master plan. Allenby is sitting there with his rebuilt, highly diverse army. He knows the Ottomans are stressed thin along a massive line from the Mediterranean Sea in the west all the way into the Judean hills in the east. How does he break that line?
Allenby's true strategic intention was incredibly bold, and it relied on overwhelming localized force. He wanted to mass the vast majority of his infantry on the extreme western edge of the front line, right against the Mediterranean coast.
The hammer.
His plan was to concentrate a massive hammer there, smash through the thinly held Ottoman trenches, and then send his mobile cavalry, the Desert Mounted Corps, rushing north through the resulting gap.
The goal wasn't just to push the Ottomans back.
No, it was to send the cavalry deep into the rear to cut off the retreat of the entire Ottoman 7th and 8th armies.
To achieve this, Allenby managed to build up a localized force superiority on the coast of roughly 5-to-1 in infantry. He had 5 of his men for every 1 Ottoman defender in that specific sector. That is an overwhelming tactical advantage.
It's massive.
But here's the massive problem. If you start moving tens of thousands of men, thousands of horses, and hundreds of artillery pieces to the coast, the enemy is going to notice.
They aren't blind.
Exactly. If they see you massing on the right, they will just shift their own troops to meet you, and your 5-to-1 advantage completely disappears.
Which means Allenby has to completely blind Lyman von Sanders. He has to convince the Ottoman High Command that the attack is coming from the exact opposite direction in the Jordan Valley, far to the east.
The operation he orchestrates to achieve this is one of the most comprehensive military deceptions in history.
It really is.
The level of operational security and pure theatrical deception they pull off here is staggering. It's like a massive analog cyber spoofing campaign.
How did they do it?
The fundamental rule for the entire British Army was simple but incredibly hard to execute. Any movement of troops, vehicles, or artillery from the eastern Jordan Valley westward towards the true attack zone on the coast had to be done in total pitch-black darkness at night.
No lights.
None. They had to hide in orange groves and olive plantations during the day. But any movement eastward towards the fake attack zone was to be done openly, brazenly, in broad daylight.
It was a monumental logistical ballet.
Yeah.
And it involved incredible acts of misdirection. For example, the Anzac Mounted Division was stationed in the Jordan Valley, and they were tasked with acting like an entire massive attack corps.
They were the actors.
Yes. They would march openly down into the valley during the day, making sure the Ottoman observers on the hills could clearly see them arriving. Then, as soon as the sun went down, those same men would be secretly packed into transport lorries, driven back out of the valley under the cover of darkness, just so they could march back down again the next day.
It's a literal military loop. They're just cycling the same troops over and over to look like a massive buildup.
And they didn't just use moving men. They built sprawling, elaborate dummy camps in the east. They set up massive canvas structures that, from the vantage point of an Ottoman scout on a distant hill, looked exactly like vast horse lines for a cavalry division.
But the most ingenious detail of this entire deception, and a true testament to practical military problem-solving, involved dealing with dust.
The dust problem.
The British commanders knew that a massive army moving through the dry desert kicks up colossal clouds of dust. It is the signature of an army on the march.
If you have dummy camps but no dust, the illusion fails.
Exactly. So they commandeered mules and had them drag heavy agricultural harrows tools meant for breaking up soil back and forth along the dirt tracks in the east all day long.
Here's where it gets really interesting. They are literally physically throwing dust in the enemy's eyes to simulate the marching colors of an army that doesn't actually exist.
And the theatricality didn't stop at the front lines. They commandeered a highly prominent hotel in Jerusalem and ostentatiously set it up as a fake expeditionary force headquarters.
Making sure enemy spies knew exactly where it was.
Right. The intelligence manipulation was multi-layered. Out in the east, T.E. Lawrence sent agents to loudly and publicly buy up huge quantities of sheep and horse forage,
signaling to Ottoman spies that a massive Allied cavalry force was preparing to operate in that area.
They even planted fake stories in the British newspapers and deliberately broadcast intercepted messages about a major military horse race meeting that was scheduled to take place on September 19th.
Which, coincidentally, was the exact day Allenby actually planned to launch his massive assault on the coast.
They wanted the Ottomans to think, the British can't be attacking, they're getting ready for a horse race.
It is a comprehensive, multi-domain deception. They are actively manipulating visual intelligence, signals intelligence, and human intelligence. But if we connect this to the bigger picture, we have to acknowledge a fundamental truth about warfare.
What's that?
None of this elaborate theater, the canvas horses, the dragging harrows, the fake headquarters, none of it matters if the enemy can simply fly an airplane over your lines and see the truth for themselves. Deception on this scale only works if the enemy is entirely deprived of the means to verify it.
Yes. You have to blind the eye in the sky. And this is where air superiority becomes the absolute linchpin of the whole operation. The Royal Air Force, alongside the Australian Flying Corps, was tasked with completely dominating the skies west of the Jordan River.
They had to ensure no German or Ottoman reconnaissance plane could see what was happening on the coast.
And they achieved absolute dominance. The flight statistics tell the story clearly.
Let's hear the numbers.
In June of 1918, hostile enemy airplanes crossed over the British lines roughly 100 times in a single week.
So they had a clear view of the battlefield.
They did. But then the RAF and the Australians went to work. They relentlessly hunted down enemy aircraft. By the last week of August, that number had dropped from 100 crossings a week to just 18.
Wow.
And during the critical 3-week buildup in September, right before the attack, the total number of enemy flights dropped to exactly 4.
For 18 days before the battle, only 2 or 3 German aircraft were seen flying at all. They practically grounded the entire enemy air force.
Ottoman and German planes couldn't even start their engines without being immediately engaged by Allied fighters.
It is a total intelligence blackout.
Think about the modern equivalent of this. If you are running a massive global business and your competitor manages to completely black out your market research, sever your data feeds, and shut down your communication servers, you are making critical decisions in a total vacuum.
You only see the reality that they want you to see.
Because of this absolute air supremacy, Lyman von Sanders and the Ottomans never saw the massive 5-to-1 concentration of troops hiding in the orange groves on the coast. They only saw the dummy camps in the dragging harrows in the east.
And that profound engineered information asymmetry sets the stage for the battle itself, which brings us to September 16th, 1918. The hammer is finally raised.
As a preliminary opening move, the Arab Northern Army, under Lawrence, attacks the vital railway junction at Daraa, far behind the Ottoman lines to the east.
This is the final distraction. Lawrence and his forces, joined by thousands of local tribesmen, start tearing up the rail lines and attacking the garrison.
And Lyman von Sanders reacts exactly how Allenby hoped he would. He views the attack on Daraa as the prelude to the main assault he expects from the Jordan Valley.
So he takes the bait.
He takes the bait. Lyman sends the garrison from a crucial central town called Al-Afule eastward to reinforce Daraa, pulling vital troops away from the very area where the real blow was going to land.
It seems like Allenby's trap has worked perfectly. But despite all the brilliant deception and air supremacy, the fog of war is never perfectly dense. There's always a wild card.
Oh, the wild card.
At the very last minute, an Indian deserter from the Allied lines crosses over the trenches and surrenders to the Turks. And this deserter tells them everything.
He warns them that a massive, overwhelming attack is coming directly at the coastal sector. This is such an incredible moment of historical drama.
It really is.
I want you to imagine this scenario. You are Rifat Bey. You are the commander of the Ottoman Excitate Corps stationed right on the coast. An enemy deserter is brought into your tent, and he literally hands you the exact enemy playbook.
He tells you a colossal force of infantry and cavalry is massing just a few miles right in front of your trenches.
Rifat Bey listens to the deserter, and he believes him. He realizes his men are sitting in a death trap. He wants to withdraw his forces immediately to pull them back into the hills where they can survive.
But he can't just order a retreat on his own. He has to run it up the flagpole.
He reports this explosive intelligence to his immediate boss, Javad Pasha, and to the overall army commander, Lyman von Sanders.
And their response is fatal.
They tell Rifat Bey no. They explicitly forbid him to withdraw his troops.
Lyman von Sanders is entirely convinced that this deserter is a planted intelligence bluff. He has bought into the Jordan Valley deception so thoroughly and for so long that he dismisses the absolute truth when it is handed to him on a silver platter.
Have you ever been in a situation, maybe in a company or an organization, where a lower-level employee or a whistleblower points out a massive, fatal flaw in the system, but senior management flat-out refuses to listen because the truth contradicts their preconceived strategy?
It's the exact same psychological trap. Lyman's refusal to act on this intelligence, his confirmation bias, essentially dooms his entire army.
Because just a few days later, the reality of the situation arrives. On September 19th at 1:00 a.m., in the pitch black of the night, the true offensive begins.
And it doesn't begin with a cavalry charge or an artillery barrage. It begins from the sky.
A single British heavy bomber, a massive aircraft for its time called the Handley Page 0400, takes off. It flies deep over the Ottoman lines and drops its full payload of 16 112-pound bombs directly onto the main telephone exchange and railway station at Al-Afule.
16 112-pound bombs. For our listener today, that might not sound like a nuclear payload, but in 1918, this isn't just dropping explosives to cause random casualties. This is a highly precise surgical decapitation strike.
Al-Afule was the central nervous system for the Ottoman defense.
By destroying that single telephone exchange, the British instantly severed the communication lines between Lyman von Sanders' central headquarters in Nazareth and the entire Ottoman 7th and 8th armies at the front.
This raises an important question regarding modern warfare and organizational structure. If you instantly remove the ability of a command center to communicate with its extremities, how quickly does a cohesive structure dissolve into isolated, paralyzed units?
The Ottomans were about to find out in the most brutal way possible, because for 2 vital days, Lehman von Sanders had no idea what was happening to his front lines.
And what was happening was annihilation. 3.5 hours after those bombs fell, at 4:30 a.m. on September 19th, the silence of the early morning is shattered.
385 Allied guns open up simultaneously on the coastal defenses.
We are talking field artillery, heavy 60-pounders, medium howitzers, and they even had 2 naval destroyers offshore firing massive shells into the Ottoman trenches from the Mediterranean. The earth is literally shaking.
But the nature of this bombardment is critical to understand. Unlike the massive week-long bombardments of the Western Front that just churned the mud and gave the enemy plenty of warning to bring up reserves, this was entirely different.
It was short, incredibly intense, and terrifyingly accurate. It lasted just 20 minutes.
At 4:50 a.m., the artillery bombardment lifts and begins to creep forward.
Okay, for someone who might not be a military historian, what exactly is a creeping barrage?
A creeping barrage is a highly synchronized, complex artillery tactic. Instead of just firing at the enemy trenches and then stopping when your men attack, the artillery fires a continuous curtain of high explosives that advances or creeps forward at a set pace.
Usually about 50 yards every minute, right?
Yes, roughly. The British and Indian infantry advance right behind this wall of explosions. It forces the enemy defenders to stay huddled at the bottom of their trenches for survival until the exact second the barrage passes over them, at which point the attacking infantry is already on the lip of their trench looking down at them.
Because the Ottomans had no strategic reserves in the rear to plug any gaps, their defensive line was like a pane of glass. It was hard on the surface, but once you crack it, it shatters completely.
The Allied infantry breaks through the 7th and 20th Ottoman divisions almost immediately.
The Ottoman line ceases to exist, and through that gaping hole on the coast, the cavalry pours in.
This is the exact operational bound that Allenby had been planning for months. The Desert Mounted Corps doesn't stop to fight the surviving Ottoman infantry in the trenches. They leave the mopping up to the foot soldiers.
The cavalry rides right past them, heading north at full speed to get behind the enemy armies.
We have a striking, highly evocative quote from Lieutenant Colonel Rex Osborne, who witnessed this massive charge. He described seeing 94 squadrons disposed in great breadth and in great depth, hurrying forward relentlessly on a decisive mission.
Can you just imagine the sheer, visceral thunder of 94 squadrons of horses galloping up the coastline at dawn?
It's an incredible image.
And the tragedy for the Ottoman frontline commanders is that they can't even pick up a telephone to warn the rear guard that the British cavalry is behind them, because the phone lines are blown up at 1 a.m. They are completely isolated.
And to make matters worse for the Ottomans, the RAF is ensuring total, continuous paralysis from the air.
The air campaign didn't stop with the bomber strike. Throughout that entire day of September 19th, pairs of British SE-.5 fighter planes flew in continuous 2-hour relays over the main German airfield at a town called Jenin.
They didn't even need to engage in romanticized aerial dogfights. They just circled over the runway with bombs and machine guns.
Whenever they saw any movement on the ground, a mechanic trying to start an engine, or someone trying to open a hangar door to get a plane out, they instantly bombed it or strafed it.
They kept the entire enemy air force pinned to the ground by force while the cavalry raced up the coast unchecked.
It is terrifying efficiency. What we are seeing here is a combined arms assault executed to absolute perfection. You have artillery, infantry, cavalry, and air power all working in flawless synchronization.
And by the end of that very first day, the remnants of the Ottoman Eighth Army are in a completely disorderly, panicked retreat into the hills, being relentlessly strafed by Australian planes from above.
The headquarters of the Exec Corps on the coast is completely overrun. The commander, Javad Pasha, who just the day before had told Reset Bey not to retreat, now literally has to flee for his life.
The collapse is total. The speed of the Allied advance is staggering, and it leads to the encirclement phase of the operation.
During the early dark hours of September 20th, the cavalry secures the crucial, narrow passes through the Carmel Range. They pour through these choke points and capture the vital communication and transport centers of Afula and Baisan deep in the Ottoman rear.
Another brigade attacks the town of Nazareth, which was the location of Lehman von Sanders' supreme headquarters.
The attack is so sudden that the overall commander of the Ottoman forces, Lehman von Sanders himself, barely escapes the town in his pajamas.
fleeing in a car just minutes before the British cavalry arrives.
This is the operational masterpiece that Allenby envisioned. He has thrown a massive, unbreakable lasso around the rear of the Ottoman armies.
And now, the Ottoman Seventh Army, which is commanded by Mustafa Kemal, a man who will later become famous as Ataturk, the revered founder of modern Turkey, realizes the horrific reality of his situation.
He is completely outflanked. His railway connection is cut. The coastal road is gone. He is surrounded.
His only possible escape route is to the east, along a rugged dirt road that leads down into a steep, narrow gorge called the Wadi Farah, heading toward the Jordan River.
On the night of September 20th, with his options exhausted, Kemal orders his army to evacuate the city of Nablus and begin a desperate retreat down this gorge.
But as soon as daylight breaks on September 21st, this massive, slow-moving column is spotted by British reconnaissance aircraft.
And what follows in that gorge is one of the most horrific, devastating examples of the destructive power of early air-to-ground warfare in military history.
It becomes known as the Wadi Farah massacre.
The retreating Ottoman column, which consists of thousands of men, horses, heavy artillery guns, and supply wagons, is hopelessly trapped in this narrow, rocky defile. There is nowhere to hide and no room to deploy anti-aircraft defenses.
The RAF and the Australian Flying Corps begin a relentless, systematic bombing campaign. Waves of aircraft pass over the trapped army every 3 minutes without pause.
They drop bombs into the packed column and then swoop down low to strafe the panicked men and animals with machine gun fire.
The Allied command had actually planned to keep this aerial operation going for 5 hours, rotating squadrons to maintain the pressure.
But the destruction was so absolute that the Ottoman Seventh Army was completely routed and ceased to exist as a fighting force in just 60 minutes.
The aftermath in the Wadi was apocalyptic. The wreckage of the destroyed column stretched for 6 continuous miles along the floor of the gorge.
When the British cavalry finally rode through the area to secure it, they counted 87 abandoned artillery guns, 55 destroyed motor lorries, and over 800 four-wheeled wagons smashed to pieces.
T.E. Lawrence summed up the sheer, brutal disproportion of this new era of warfare perfectly. When reflecting on the destruction in the Wadi Farah, he wrote, "The RAF lost 4 killed. The Turks lost a corps."
If we connect this to the bigger picture, this specific moment in the Wadi Farah marks a profound, undeniable tactical shift in military history.
What you are witnessing is the bloody death knell of 19th century warfare, the idea of massive marching columns moving across open ground, trying to survive in a 20th century battle space that is entirely dominated by air power.
The Ottomans had prepared for a static, trench-like defense. They had machine guns and dugouts, but they were entirely unequipped and unadapted for rapid, multidimensional mobile warfare that came at them from the flanks and from the sky simultaneously.
So what does this all mean for you listening right now? Because there is a deeply relevant lesson here about adaptability.
The Ottomans built strong trenches. They amassed heavy machine guns. They felt perfectly secure in their static defense. But because they couldn't adapt to an enemy that was moving at a completely different speed, an enemy that was attacking their communications networks and literally raining fire from the sky, their formidable defenses became nothing more than a death trap.
Think about your own career, your business, or how your organization operates.
If you are relying on a static defense, relying on the way things have always been done, while the world and your competitors are moving at the speed of flight, you are incredibly vulnerable.
The paralysis induced by speed and surprise during this battle was absolute. According to the biographer of Harry Chauvel, the general who commanded the Desert Mounted Corps, Allenby's operational plan looked forward in principle, and even in specific detail, to the blitzkrieg tactics that would tear across Europe in 1939.
Concentration of force, sheer surprise, and relentless speed completely unraveled a massive entrenched army in a matter of days.
And once that solid center falls, the dominoes start crashing down everywhere. While the 7th and 8th armies are being annihilated on the coast and in the wadis, we have to look back east, across the Jordan River.
Remember Chaytor's force, the Anzacs, the West Indies Regiment, and the Jewish volunteers who spent all that time dragging harrows and faking the big attack earlier in the week.
Now it was their turn to strike for real. With the Western Front collapsed, Chaytor's force moves out. On September 22nd, they capture the critical Jisr ed-Damia Bridge over the Jordan River.
Then they push forward aggressively, capturing the town of Es Salt, and finally, on September 25th, they capture the major city of Amman.
The Ottoman Fourth Army, which had been guarding this eastern sector, was completely unaware of the absolute destruction of their sister armies on the coast.
Remember, communications were severed.
They only realized the war was lost when shattered refugees and fleeing soldiers started pouring into their lines from the west. Once the commanders of the Fourth Army realized they were the last ones left standing, they began a panicked, disorganized retreat north towards Daraa.
And just like the forces in the Wadi Farah, they are harassed endlessly by air attacks from above and ambushed relentlessly by Arab irregulars from the dunes.
And this collapse creates a fascinating, highly complex, and very dark psychological situation on the ground. The Ottoman garrison that had been stationed far down south in Meran is desperately trying to retreat north to join the rest of the survivors.
They find their path entirely blocked at a place called Ziza by the Anzac Mounted Division. But the British Empire forces aren't the only ones hunting them. They are also being closely pursued by the local Arab forces.
And the Ottoman soldiers know exactly what they have done during their years of occupying those lands. They know the harsh realities of their rule and the atrocities they've committed against the local Arab villages.
So they face a horrific choice. Rather than face the wrath and vengeance of the local tribesmen they had oppressed for so long, the entire Ottoman garrison at Ziza makes a remarkable decision.
They choose to surrender intact to the Australians and New Zealanders. They essentially beg the Anzacs to take them prisoner and protect them, just to avoid being slaughtered by the Arab forces closing in behind them.
It is a stark, tragic illustration of the deep hatreds and blood debts sown by military occupation. And those debts were collected as the campaign neared its end.
As the Allied cavalry and the Arab forces relentlessly pursue the remaining, fleeing Ottomans toward the city of Damascus, the retreating Turks, in their desperation and anger, commit terrible atrocities against hostile Arab villages along the route.
In immediate retaliation, the Arab forces declare a policy of taking no prisoners. At a village called Tafas, after discovering a massacre committed by the fleeing Turks, the enraged Arab forces wipe out nearly 5,000 Ottoman soldiers. Jamal Pasha, a high-ranking Ottoman commander, only narrowly escapes with his life.
The pursuit from the battlefield all the way to Damascus is brutal, chaotic, and lightning fast. By September 30th, the Australian cavalry units are intercepting the Damascus garrison as they try to flee through the Barada Gorge.
On October 1st, the historic city of Damascus officially falls to the Allies. They take 20,000 Ottoman prisoners in the city alone.
And amidst all this chaos, there is a logistical detail that I find genuinely miraculous. The Allied command actually manages to feed those 20,000 prisoners and all of the thousands of cavalry horses without depriving the local inhabitants of Damascus of their essential food supplies.
Given the state of the supply lines, at the end of such a long, rapid, and destructive advance, it's an incredible feat of supply management and humanitarian restraint.
But looking at the military outcome, the scale of the victory is almost hard to overstate. The entire campaign, from the moment that first creeping barrage opened up at Megiddo to the triumphant fall of Damascus, results in the surrender of 75,000 Ottoman soldiers.
75,000 combat troops. That is not just a tactical defeat. That is the total evaporation of an empire's military capability in the Middle East.
It's a collapse so absolute, so swift that it almost defies belief, especially when you compare it to the bloody, inch-by-inch grinding slaughters that were still happening over on the Western Front at the exact same time.
The historian Edward Erickson contextualized the psychological impact of this defeat brilliantly. He compared the Battle of Megiddo to what the Germans famously called the Black Days of the German army on the Western Front.
Erickson noted that the sheer scale and speed of the disaster at Megiddo proved to the Turkish general staff and to all but the most fanatically diehard nationalists in the government that the war was entirely, irrevocably lost.
Their armies were gone, the empire was defenseless. And sure enough, the political reality caught up to the military reality. By October 31st, hostilities officially cease with the signing of the Armistice of Mudros. The Ottoman Empire's war is over.
So we have covered the geography, the deception, the artillery, the air power, and the collapse. What General Edmund Allenby achieved at the Battle of Megiddo was nothing short of breathtaking.
He completely rewrote the rulebook of modern war. He broke the seemingly unbreakable stalemate of World War I trench warfare, and he didn't do it just with brute, bloody force. He did it with a brilliantly orchestrated symphony of creeping barrages, rapid mobile cavalry exploiting the gaps, and an entirely unmatched use of overwhelming air power.
He achieved decisive, world-changing results at a comparatively incredibly low human cost for the Allied forces.
He proved fundamentally that a rigid, static defense is easily shattered if the attacking force can dictate the terms of engagement and the speed of the battle.
By completely blinding Lehman von Sanders with an elaborate web of deception and total air superiority, and by immediately decapitating the Ottoman communications network with that single, perfectly placed bomber strike, Allenby ensured that the battle was effectively won before the very first infantrymen even charged out of their trenches.
Which leaves us with a final, provocative thought for you to mull over as you go about your day. We've talked about adaptability, but let's talk about the illusion of security. The Ottoman commanders felt perfectly secure behind their heavily armed, machine gun-laden trenches in the Judean hills.
They looked at their defenses and thought they were impregnable.
But Allenby proved a timeless truth. If an enemy or a competitor or a disruption in your industry can cut your communications, blind your vision, and move at a speed far faster than your ability to react, your formidable defenses don't protect you at all.
They just become your tomb. You're trapped by the very walls you built to keep yourself safe.
It is a profound historical lesson that applies far beyond the battlefield. You have to actively ask yourself, in your own life, in your career trajectory, or in your overarching business strategy, are you relying on a static defense?
Are you pouring all your energy into building deeper trenches and thicker walls in a world that is fundamentally moving at the speed of light?
Because if you are relying on the old rules to protect you, the next Megiddo might be waiting just over the horizon.
Thank you so much for taking this deep dive with us today. It has been an incredible journey, from the blinding dust of the Jordan Valley to the thundering skies over the plain of Armageddon.
Keep questioning your assumptions, keep adapting to the speed of the world around you, and we will see you on the next deep dive.